Let's talk more about meal timing as it relates to fat loss and metabolic health. One of the most controlled studies to evaluate this was recently published in the journal Cell Metabolism, and I think the findings are quite fascinating, and it allows some personalization when it comes to when you consume the bulk of your calories, either in the morning or in the evening. This study, my friends, was a randomized crossover study to look at the differences between consuming the bulk of your calories in the morning versus consuming the bulk of your calories in the evening throughout the 4-week period during the same feeding window. Now, some of you might say, oh, well, this study's already flawed because it's the same meal window and so on. But I think the findings are quite important and allow for us to better personalize what type of feeding window we're going to choose and when we should consume the bulk of our calories, specifically as it relates to body fat changes, body composition changes, weight loss, and metabolic health, because that's exactly what this study was designed to look at. The primary parameters or outcomes were to look at the differences in body composition changes, that is fat loss, weight loss, over the course of 4 weeks. But secondary outcomes these investigators were looking to see is if consuming more calories in the morning versus in the evening time, if that would lead to different changes in appetite, satiety, blood sugar regulation, and energy expenditure. Because we've talked about, what are the components of your resting metabolic rate? Well, of course, you have how much muscle mass you have, how much you weigh, you have the non-exercise associated physical activity. So you're out, you have a standing desk, you're fidgeting, you're moving. There's also the thermic effect of food, which was actually significantly different in this study, meaning the people who ate majority of their energy in the morning had a greater thermic effect of food. It was about 160 some odd calories per day compared to the people who had more energy in the evening meal. And we're going to talk more about that. And also what was different here was appetite and satiety scores, which I think are important. So if you're one that's prone to snacking after dinner, having cookies, ice cream, treats, and so forth, maybe you want to have a bigger breakfast compared to a bigger dinner. So allowing some personalization. So as I mentioned, this was one of the most well-controlled feeding studies to assess how meal timing impacts body composition, weight loss, and metabolic health. So the title of the study is Timing of Daily Calorie Loading Affects Appetite and Hunger Responses Without Changes in Energy Metabolism in Healthy Subjects with Obesity. As I mentioned, this was published in Cell Metabolism. Here's a great graphical abstract of the study and the 2 different parameters. There was 31 subjects in this study. And what I like about it, it was a crossover study design, meaning all of the study subjects, 31 participants, the bulk of the calories were in the morning, then they had a 1-week washout, then they did another 4-week arm of the study where they had the bulk of the calories in the evening and looked at the between group differences in weight loss, in appetite, satiety scores, and also blood sugar related parameters, which I thought were quite interesting. Now, here's where my biases came in. When I saw the graphical abstract and I saw the title, I thought, oh, for sure, the group that eats majority of their calories in the morning would lose more weight. Well, actually, there was no between group differences with regards to body weight. Now, you might be saying, well, how can that be, Mike? Well, what's going on? Well, this is why we need to break down these studies and sort of talk about them, because I think it's important to understand that whatever you do, you need to be consistent with that. And if you're a morning person or an evening person, then cater to your preferences and just be more consistent with your feeding windows. I think consistency trumps all, and then personalizing this to your preferences, because if you're more consistent, you're more likely to adhere to that program. Some people just do not like to eat in the morning. They might do fine with like some avocado and eggs and they're good to go, but they couldn't have 45% of their calories in the morning, as this study had prescribed to individuals in the arm of the study during the morning loading arm, where the calorie intake was loaded, where 45% of energy that was consumed the entire day was at breakfast, versus the evening loading part of the study, 45% of the calories was during dinner time. And again, the main findings here were differences in appetite and satiety. So I want to get in to the nitty gritty here because I know you like the details and talk about that. But first, friends, I just want to welcome you all back. It's Mike Mutzel as always. Thank you for being here. Thanks for subscribing. If you're enjoying this video, please share this with a friend as a direct text message. That goes a long way. And also leave a comment below if you want more videos like this where you find these studies interesting. Also, since we're talking about compressing feeding windows and intermittent fasting personalization, a tool that might help you support your metabolic health is a natural product called berberine. Berberine hydrochloride has been used in Chinese medicine for the past 1,500 years. It's arguably one of the most effective natural products to support metabolic health. So we have the berberine fasting accelerator over at myoscience.com. How you can utilize and think about this is to use berberine to kickstart your fast. For most of you, that's after dinner. That's literally time zero when you fast. You can take berberine to help support metabolic health, to increase levels of ketones, and support the fasting physiology. If you like to, delay your feeding window until 11 or noon the next day, you can also take 1 to 2 capsules in the morning. This can help kickstart your fast and actually help with hunger and cravings. That's been, I think, the biggest feedback from customers over at Myoscience is squashing those evening cravings for carby, starchy, processed sweets. So you can utilize this as a way, especially around the holiday season where people are offering you pumpkin pie and cake and all these things, and hopefully avoid the temptation for those sorts of foods. So you can save using the code podcast over at myoscience.com. So for background and perspective, as many of you know, food influences your body's peripheral circadian clock system, which might impact nutrient partitioning, fat loss, and overall metabolic health. So there's been several studies, a seminal one back in 2016, and another study in 2018 that found that time-restricted feeding actually caused weight loss. And so what these scientists wanted to figure out in this new study was, is the weight loss contingent upon when the bulk of the calories is consumed, either versus morning versus evening? Because of the fact that food is a Zeitburger, it actually influences your body's clock system. And so here's specifically the study parameters. I think this is just important to understand how the study was designed. It was a 4-week study with a week washout, and then they randomized people to the other arm of the study. So you had the morning loading study, which again, the feeding window, it was about an 11-hour feeding window. And the morning loading subjects, as I mentioned, consumed about 45% of their total calories, which was matched to the individual doing BMR testing before the start of the study. So these people were eating in a energy neutral conditions based upon their overall metabolic rate, and 35% of their energy for the whole day was consumed during lunch. And again, during the morning load group, there was 20% of the calories was consumed at dinner. Now, the sort of inverse was the case for the evening load arm of the study, which was again 4 weeks duration. We have 31 study subjects. For breakfast, they had 20% of their overall energy consumed at breakfast. Lunch was 35%, and 45% of the calories was consumed at dinner. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, of course, I already know what the outcome is. The people who had their calories, the 45%, the evening load group, they didn't lose as much weight compared to the morning load group. And that's where my biases would have led me to conclude without reading the study. But after looking at the details, there was no statistically significant between group differences between the morning loading versus evening loading. But here is the difference. And I think it's important to understand that there was greater satiety and appetite suppression in the individuals in the arm of the study of the morning load, because if you eat, and we all know this, right? If you eat a big breakfast, have a big lunch, you're not really hungry for dinner, which this is where personalization comes in. Again, if you're prone to snacking, binging, having junk food, having ice cream and sweets and so forth in the evening, try pivoting your meal window or partitioning your calories such that you consume majority of your calories before dinner so that you're not hungry for having these snacky foods and things like that. So there was no statistically significant differences in blood sugar related parameters, and what they looked at in terms of glucoregulatory factors here in table 2 were fasting glucose, fasting insulin, the HOMA-IR score, also LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, triglycerides, and much more. So again, between the baseline and the intervention, there was significant differences, but not in between the two different groups in terms of morning loading versus evening loading, which I think is interesting. So here's what is fascinating. So the changes in weight were not any different between the different groups, but there was changes in what's called the VAS score. So this is a visual acuity sensitivity analysis that looks at how satisfied or satiated are people and what is their perceptions around food. And there was statistically significant between group differences between the morning loading and the evening loading, meaning people who ate the bulk of their calories in the morning versus evening tend to be able to have more sort of volitional control over foods and snacking. They were more satiated. They had better appetite regulation. The other statistically significant finding was the thermic effect of food. The difference here, I think, was 67 some odd calories. I can read to you exactly right here. Due to feasibility, we were only able to measure the thermic effect of food following the morning meal, and hence the meal size largely dictated the meal responses, with the thermic effect of food being significantly larger after the morning load versus the evening load. And the difference here was, again, this is throughout the whole day, was 147 calories in the morning loading group versus 98 calories in the evening loading group. So that comes out to about 50 calories a day. Not massively different in terms of in the whole overall, sort of pie of energy expenditure, but 50 calories a day extrapolated out, 365 days, that might make a difference. But again, I think the most important thing here is knowing yourself. Are you prone or are you susceptible to having sugary or snacky foods in the evening? Then you might benefit from having the bulk of your calories in the earlier part of your day versus in the evening. So I found this to be effective with certain clients who had started intermittent fasting, back when it started to gain popularity in 2016 range, where people were fasting all day, then having a lot of calories before they went to bed, and they found themselves overindulging. They would have their main dinner, then they would want to have snacks and cookies and ice cream, and they weren't very satiated. And this sort of corroborates with this study finding the exact thing, that if you have small amounts of calories earlier in the day and have a big bolus, 45% of your daily energy intake in the evening time, that does affect appetite and satiety. So I think that's the biggest takeaway from the study, is realizing that there are appetite and satiety differences with regards to meal timing and energy partitioning. So it doesn't necessarily mean that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. But again, if you're one that likes to snack and so forth, you might benefit from having a larger breakfast compared to a larger dinner. So I think that's important. But again, what's unique about this study is it directly assessed this calorie partitioning and showed that, well, it doesn't really totally impact body weight, but there might be a benefit when it comes to appetite and satiety, which is a major aspect of body composition control and weight loss over the long haul. So I wanted to share this with you. I'll put links to the show notes to this particular study and related studies that we've recently talked about. It seems like the journal Cell and Metabolism is doing a phenomenal job at publishing related studies like this, looking at pairing different interventions. We've talked about exercise paired with fasting and time-restricted feeding paired with low carb versus high carb. And I love the work that is being, submitted by this journal and published by this journal. So phenomenal research going on with regards to metabolic health. So friends, I really want to thank you for tuning all the way in. Thanks for sharing this information. Thanks for being here. Thanks for leaving a comment and hitting that like button. And we'll catch you in a future episode down the road. Have a great day.